No
Pressure's
pressure. Okay, go for it.
All right. The first person I ever met with Ebola was a boy named James. He had a red fire truck, and he was 5 years old, and he hated me. He hated all the nurses in the unit because our job was to make him hydrate, to give him shots, to give him IVs, to try to save his life. But he looked completely normal. And that was the thing that freaked me out the most, because before I signed up to go treat patients in Sierra Leone during the world's worst Ebola crisis, everything I had read, including that great work of fiction, The Hot Zone, freaked me out. Patients bleeding, dying, the new zombie apocalypse, all these things coming, falling apart in some of the poorest countries in Africa. And I was scared to death. And when I saw James, I was shocked. The next kiddo I met a few weeks later, Isatu, also shocked me. When she came to our unit, she was in the back of an ambulance and she wasn't moving. She was barely breathing, she was covered in stool, she was covered in vomit, and I knew she was gonna die. And that was kind of the new normal for us. As a pediatric emergency nurse, I worked with kids, and our survival rate for children under the age of 5 was 20%. We lost 8 out of all the 10 kids that we treated. And so when we saw Isatu, we didn't get our hopes up until we pulled out that needle to start the IV. And in her 6th state, she saw that needle and she kicked me. And she punched one of the doctors nearby and started squirming and moving all over the place. And I got so excited because in that moment, she was acting like a normal 3-year-old. She too was normal. We got the IV started, we started hydrating her, and over about 5 days, very precarious days, she slowly started to do better. After 7 days, she was up on her feet again, walking, moving, playing with us. When we'd come to the unit to treat the other kids who were too sick to get out of bed, she would cling to my leg and I had to pry her off, sometimes with the help of another provider, as she wanted to play. I thought she was gonna make it. Now, Ebola is a complicated disease, and one of the most horrific parts about Ebola is that our kids that had Ebola, those that died often had a great day right before they died. They looked super sick, and then they sat up in bed. They talked, they played, they ate food, and then before we knew it, they were gone. The day I peeled Isatu off of my leg, I wasn't thinking about that. I was just grateful that she was doing so well. And an hour later, as I was about to leave the unit, my buddy Paul, another ICU nurse, called me over and he said, "Tim, we got a problem." And we were looking down and we saw Isatu through our fogged glasses and our personal protective equipment that was about 130 degrees inside of the suits. And we saw her from a distance look like she was sleeping, but she was tremoring from head to toe. She was having seizures. And so we called for help. We brought in Valium. We gave her enough Valium to kill me and you combined. And she kept seizing for off and on for about 8 hours. And then the seizures finally stopped. And we sat with her and we held her until she would stop breathing because we knew it wouldn't be long. But she didn't quit. 3 days, she was more or less comatose. On the 4th day, I was cleaning her face, preparing her body for burial, which at the time was zipping up in a body bag and being sprayed in bleach. I was wiping her face and a washcloth went over her lips and she sucked on it. And I thought I was hallucinating because I was exhausted and heartbroken. So I put the washcloth in her mouth and she went to town and started drinking and drinking and drinking. And for 2 more days, she started to convalesce and get stronger and move around. We were thrilled. She was our New Year's baby. She was gonna be the first child under 5 in the new year in 2015 that was gonna survive, and we weren't gonna let anything get in our way. But the problem was, she had no family. And she was too sick to nourish herself. And we knew if we sent her home back to her village, she would die of malnutrition. And our team was once again heartbroken. We put our heads together, we worked and talked with anyone we could to try to figure out what we could do to save her, but we realized there was not much else we could do. And if she were to seize again, we decided we should just let her go. Except for one social worker who was from Sierra Leone who wasn't gonna give up on her. So one day he got on a motorbike and he went back into her village, even though he wasn't supposed to, even though we thought her parents were already dead, they had died from Ebola. He said, "I'm going back one last time." And he asked around the village and he said, "Hey, I'm looking for parents of a girl named Isatu." And after a few hours of asking, a young man about 22 came up to him and said, "I had a daughter named Isatu. She died 3 weeks ago in an Ebola treatment center." And the social worker said, "Get on my bike right now." The man and the woman, the The parents of Isatu got on the motorbike. They drove 2.5 hours over these horrific roads and came to our treatment unit. And I had the honor to clean Isatu one last time and carry her to her mother and say, you need to feed her, nourish her, be with her 24 hours a day, and she'll play again. 2 weeks later, before I left the Ebola treatment unit, I got to visit Isatu, and she ran to me and danced and played with me. So when I think about building bridges, I realize that none of us came to the Ebola crisis with the efforts of building bridges, but the reality is we did. We were doctors, we were nurses, we were social workers, we were community health workers willing to break the rules to go back into a community to do all we could to save as many lives as possible. We were Muslims, we were Christians, we were Jews, we were atheists. We were special ops soldiers from the military. We were pacifists. We radically disagreed on political beliefs, and we would discuss them overnight at beers when we would refresh and talk about our day. But every day when we went back to the unit, our job was to save lives and prevent the world's worst disease from spreading. So if you say we built bridges, I'd be honored to think that. Ultimately, we just showed up.